In the depths of the unknown, where shadows whisper and fear takes form. Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub, the place where classic horror and mystery come alive. Tonight, I bring you a reimagined version of The Death of Halpin Frayser by Ambrose Bierce, retold with a suspenseful narrative style that grips the soul and breathes new life into this haunting tale. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the shadows. Legends whisper that death does not merely silence the living, it reshapes them. Some claim the spirit lingers, returning in fleeting glimpses, wearing the face it once possessed. Yet darker tales speak of bodies rising without their souls, walking husks driven only by hatred. And worse still, gentle spirits in life, twisted into malice by the grave. On a suffocating midsummer night, deep within a forest, a man stirred from a heavy, dreamless slumber. He lifted his head from the damp earth, eyes straining into the blackness. From his lips slipped two words, unbidden, as though whispered by something unseen. Catherine Leroux. He could not explain why he spoke the name, nor even whose name it was. That man was Halpin Frayser. Once he had lived in St. Helena. Where he resides now is less certain, for Halpin Frayser is dead. He was 32, an age that children, gazing from the far shore of life's beginning, already see as ancient. He had spent the day wandering the hills west of Napa Valley, hunting small game. But as the afternoon darkened with clouds, he lost his way. The forest closed in, trails vanished, and night overtook him. Exhausted, he collapsed at the roots of a great madrone tree, surrendering to sleep beneath the canopy of branches and the indifferent sky. Hours later, in the heart of the night, something stirred him awake, not the rustle of leaves, nor the cry of an animal, but a presence, an unseen messenger brushing against his soul. He sat upright, his breath caught in his throat, and spoke aloud a name he did not know, a name that seemed to rise from the earth itself.
Halpin Frayser was no philosopher, no seeker of hidden truths. When he awoke in the dead of night, deep in the forest, and found himself whispering a name he did not know, he felt no urge to question the mystery. He only shivered faintly, as if the night air had brushed his skin, and lay back down. But this time, his sleep was not empty. He dreamed. He found himself walking a pale, dusty road, glowing faintly in the twilight of a summer night. Where it began, where it ended, he could not tell. Yet, in the strange logic of dreams, it all seemed natural. Soon the road split. One path was broad and familiar, the other narrow, overgrown, abandoned. It seemed to lead toward something dark, something evil. And yet, without hesitation, he turned down that forsaken way, driven by a force he could not resist. As he pressed deeper into the gloom, he felt unseen presences moving with him. From the trees came whispers, broken, half-formed words in a language he almost understood. They sounded like fragments of a vast, monstrous conspiracy plotting against his very soul. Though the night was heavy, the forest glowed with a pale, sourceless light. No tree cast a shadow. Then, in the hollow of an old wheel rut, he saw a shallow pool glimmering red. He knelt, dipped his hand, and froze. His fingers came up wet, stained crimson. It was blood. And now he saw it everywhere. The weeds by the roadside were splattered with it. The dust between the ruts was pitted as though a red rain had fallen. The trunks of the trees were streaked with it, and from their leaves blood dripped softly, like dew.
He moved through the nightmare with a terror that felt almost expected, as though he were paying the price for some forgotten crime. The certainty of guilt pressed on him, yet the memory of the sin itself eluded him. He searched his past in vain, chasing fragments of half-remembered scenes, faces, places, moments, each dissolving into the next, leaving only confusion. It was as if he had murdered in the dark, not knowing whom nor why. The forest itself seemed to accuse him. The strange, sourceless light glowed with a silent menace. The twisted plants and mournful trees leaned toward him, conspiring against his peace. From above and all around came whispers, unnatural sighs, voices not of this earth. At last, unable to endure the weight of silence, he broke free of the spell that bound him. With all his strength, he shouted into the night. His cry shattered into countless strange echoes, babbling and stammering through the forest until it faded into nothing. And yet, in that act of defiance, he felt a flicker of courage. "I will not suffer in silence," he declared. "If there are powers here that are not wholly evil, let them hear me. I will leave behind a record of my torment, my plea, my protest. I, a mortal, helpless and penitent, a poet." In truth, Halpin Frayser was no poet, except in this dream. He pulled from his coat a small red leather notebook, its pages waiting for words. Lacking a pencil, he snapped a twig, dipped it into a pool of blood at his feet, and began to write. But before the first line was finished, a sound split the night. It began as distant laughter, low, wild, and hollow. It swelled, drawing nearer until it became a hideous, joyless cackle, like the cry of a loon echoing across a midnight lake. Louder and louder it grew, until it broke into a monstrous shout, so close it seemed to burst from the very air beside him. Then, slowly, it ebbed away, fading into the silence of the forest. Yet Frayser knew the truth. The thing that laughed had not gone. It was still there, watching, waiting.
A strange force began to creep over him, neither touch, nor sound, nor sight, but a dreadful awareness. It was as if his very soul recognized the approach of something vast and malevolent, a presence greater than the unseen whispers that haunted the forest. He knew it was the source of that hideous laugh, and now it was drawing closer. From where, he could not guess. All lesser fears dissolved into this single, crushing terror. Yet one thought clung to him. He must finish his desperate appeal, a plea to whatever merciful powers might wander this cursed wood. Perhaps they would save him, or grant him the mercy of oblivion. He wrote furiously, the twig in his hand, bleeding inkless lines of red. But midway through a sentence, his strength betrayed him. His arms fell limp, the book slipped to the ground, and he sat frozen, unable to cry out. Before him stood a figure. The face was sharp, the eyes blank and lifeless. His mother, silent, pale, clothed in the garments of the grave. In life, Halpin Frayser had grown up far from this haunted forest. His childhood was spent in Nashville, Tennessee, in a family of means and reputation. The Fraysers had survived the ruin of civil war with their place in society intact, and their children were raised with education and refinement. Halpin, the youngest, was delicate and perhaps a little spoiled. caught between the smothering devotion of his mother and the neglect of a father consumed by politics. His father's ears were tuned to the thunder of speeches and the roar of crowds, leaving little attention for his own household. Halpin himself was dreamy, indolent, and romantic by nature. Though trained in law, his heart leaned toward literature. Among his kin, it was whispered that he carried the spirit of his great-grandfather, Myron Bayne, a colonial poet of some distinction, whose verses had once been printed at family expense, only to vanish from the market unloved. Yet the family, proud of their political legacy, had little patience for poetry. They saw Halpin as an oddity, a black sheep destined to shame them with verse instead of honor them with power. The Tennessee Fraysers were practical folk, and in their world, politics was the only noble calling.
To be fair to young Halpin, though he carried many of the traits attributed to his poetic ancestor, the famed colonial bard Myron Bayne, his supposed inheritance of genius was more rumor than reality. He had never written a line of verse, nor shown the slightest gift for it. Yet some believed the dormant spark might one day ignite. In truth, Halpin was a restless spirit, a little careless, a little spoiled. Between him and his mother, however, there existed a bond of perfect sympathy. She, too, secretly revered the memory of Myron Bayne, though she hid this devotion from the world. Only Halpin shared her secret, and that shared guilt bound them closer still. As he grew older, the attachment between mother and son deepened into something that outsiders often misread. Their tenderness, their constant companionship, their romantic temperaments, together they gave the impression, to strangers at least, of lovers rather than kin. From childhood he had called her Katie, and the name lingered, softening their intimacy. One afternoon, Halpin entered his mother's chamber. He kissed her gently on the forehead, toyed with a loose strand of her dark hair, and asked with forced calm, "Would you mind terribly, Katie, if I were called away to California for a few weeks?" Her answer was written on her face before her lips could move. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes filled with tears. She would mind, deeply. "My son," she whispered, gazing at him with infinite tenderness. "I should have known this was coming. Last night I wept half the night, for in the other half I dreamed. Grandfather Bayne stood beside his portrait, young and handsome as ever, and pointed to yours, hanging on the same wall. But when I looked, your face was hidden beneath a burial cloth. Your father laughed at me, but you and I know such visions are not meaningless. And beneath that cloth I saw the marks of hands upon your throat. Forgive me for speaking so plainly, but we have never hidden such things from each other. Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps it does not mean California. Or perhaps," she trembled, "perhaps you will take me with you." Halpin Frayser, ever the more rational of the two, could not quite share his mother's dramatic reading of her dream. To his mind, it hinted at something far simpler and far closer to home. He half believed it foretold not a journey to California, but a violent end upon his own native soil, strangled by unseen hands. Before he could voice this thought, Mrs. Frayser pressed on, her tone shifting with sudden practicality. "Are there not healing springs in California?" she asked. "Places where one cures rheumatism and neuralgia? Look, my fingers feel so stiff. I'm almost certain they pained me in my sleep." She held out her hands for him to see. Whatever diagnosis Halpin might have formed, he concealed it behind a smile. For in truth, her hands showed little sign of suffering, less perhaps than any patient ever offered to a physician in search of a prescription for distant travel. And so, by the odd logic of duty that governed them both, the matter was settled. Halpin would go west, as his business required. His mother would remain behind, yielding to a wish her husband scarcely knew he possessed. In San Francisco, fate struck swiftly. One dark night, while walking along the waterfront, Halpin was seized without warning. In an instant, he was no longer a free man but a sailor, shanghaied aboard a proud vessel bound for distant seas. His misfortunes did not end there. The ship was wrecked upon a lonely island in the South Pacific, and 6 long years passed before a daring trading schooner rescued the survivors and returned them to San Francisco. Halpin came back with a little more than his pride. His purse was empty, but his spirit remained unbroken. Refusing charity, he found shelter with a fellow castaway near the town of St. Helena. It was there, while awaiting word and money from home, that he took to wandering the hills with his gun, until one fateful night when his dreams and his destiny began to entwine.
The figure before him, so like his mother, yet so hideously unlike, was a vision of pure horror. It stirred no tenderness, no memory of love, no echo of the past. Every finer emotion was drowned in terror. He tried to flee, but his legs were heavy as stone. His arms hung useless at his sides. Only his eyes remained his own, locked helplessly upon the lifeless stare of the thing. He knew what it was. Not a wandering spirit without a body, but something far worse, a body without a soul. Its gaze held no mercy, no pity, no thought, only the blank malice of the grave. For what felt like an eternity, the apparition stood a single step away, watching him with the mindless menace of a beast. Then, with sudden ferocity, it lunged. Its hand shot forward, clawing for his throat. The shock broke the paralysis of his body, though not of his will. His legs fought wildly, as if driven by some blind instinct, while his mind remained trapped in the spell. For a moment, he seemed to watch the struggle from outside himself, his living body locked in combat with a dead intelligence. Then, with a jolt, he was back inside his own skin, fighting with all the desperate strength of a man against the unnatural fury of the thing. But how can flesh prevail against a creature born of nightmare? The imagination that creates such an enemy is already defeated. Despite his strength, despite his frantic resistance, he felt the cold fingers close around his throat. He was forced backward to the ground, the corpse-like face lowering until it hovered a breath away from his own. Then, darkness. A sound rose in the void, the distant roll of drums, the murmur of countless voices, a single piercing cry that silenced all. And Halpin Frayser dreamed that he was dead. The dream dissolves, the scene shifts. The warm, clear night gave way to a morning drowned in fog. By mid-afternoon of the day before, a faint wisp of vapor had been seen clinging to the western slopes of Mount St. Helena, high among the barren ridges. It was so thin, so fragile, so ghost-like, that one might have said, "Look quickly, soon it will vanish." The mist thickened quickly. At first, it clung to the mountain like a pale veil, but soon it stretched outward, spilling into the air above the lower slopes. It spread north and south, swallowing stray wisps of vapor as though with deliberate intent. Before long, the summit itself was hidden, and the valley below lay beneath a vast gray canopy. By nightfall in Calistoga, the stars were gone. By morning, the sun had vanished too. The fog crept southward, devouring ranch after ranch, until even the town of St. Helena, 9 miles away, was smothered in its grip. The roads were damp, the trees dripping, the birds silent in their nests.
The daylight was pale and ghastly, stripped of warmth and color. At the first hint of dawn, 2 men set out from St. Helena, walking north along the valley road toward Calistoga. Each carried a gun, but no one would have mistaken them for hunters. They were men hunters. Holker, a deputy sheriff from Napa, and Geraldson, a detective from San Francisco. "How far is it?" Holker asked, his boots stirring the damp white dust. "The White Church, 1/2 a mile more," Geraldson replied. Then, with a faint smile, he added, "Though it's neither white nor a church. It's an abandoned schoolhouse, weathered gray with age. They once held services there, back when it was new. Now it stands beside a graveyard, a place that would delight a poet. Can you guess why I asked you to come armed?" Holker shrugged. "I've learned not to guess. You always explain when the time comes. But if I had to hazard one, you want me to help arrest one of the corpses in that graveyard?" Geraldson ignored the jest. "Do you remember Branscombe, the man who slit his wife's throat?" "Of course. I wasted a week chasing him, and all I got was an empty purse. There's still a $500 reward, but no one's ever laid eyes on him since." "Don't tell me." "Yes," Geraldson cut in. "He's been here all along. He comes by night, to the graveyard at the White Church."
The devil! That's where they buried his wife.
"You'd think someone might have guessed he'd return to her grave," Geraldson said.
Holker shook his head. "The last place anyone would expect him to show his face." "Exactly. And when I heard you'd failed everywhere else, I staked out the graveyard."
"And you caught him?"
"Caught him? Damn it, he caught me! Had me at gunpoint, marched me like a prisoner. It's a miracle he didn't put a bullet through me. He's clever, I'll give him that. Half the reward will be enough for me if you're feeling generous." Holker laughed, admitting his creditors would be glad of any share. "I only wanted to show you the ground," Geraldson continued, "and to make a plan. Best we come armed, even in daylight." "The man must be insane," Holker muttered. "But if he's mad, he won't be convicted. The reward is for capture and conviction." That thought sobered him. He slowed, then forced himself onward. "Well, he looks mad enough," Geraldson admitted. "I've never seen a more ragged, filthy, unshaven wretch outside a tramp camp. But I've set my sights on him, and I won't let go. There's glory in it for us. No one else even knows he's this side of the mountains." "All right," Holker said. "Let's see the ground." He grinned darkly, quoting an old epitaph, "Where you must shortly lie. That is, if Branscombe tires of your meddling. By the way, I heard his name isn't really Branscombe." Geraldson frowned. "What is it then?" "I can't recall. Something like Pardee. The woman he murdered, his wife, was a widow when he met her. She'd come to California searching for relatives. You know the story." "Naturally. But tell me, if you don't know his real name, how did you find the right grave? I was told it was carved on the headboard." Geraldson hesitated. "I don't know the grave. I've only been watching the place in general. Part of our work this morning will be to identify it." He stopped, pointing ahead. "There, the White Church." For a long stretch, the road had been lined with open fields. But now, on the left, the land gave way to a forest. Oaks, madroños, and towering spruces, their trunks ghostly and half-hidden in the fog. The undergrowth was tangled, but not impassable. Holker scanned the mist ahead, seeing nothing. Then, as they turned into the woods, a shape emerged, faint, gray, distant. A few steps more, and it loomed before them. A small, weather-stained building, dripping with moisture. It was no church at all, but an abandoned schoolhouse, a crude box-like structure of stone and timber.
its roof green with moss, its windows long stripped of glass and frame. Not a ruin, but ruined. California's poor substitute for the monuments of the past that travelers admired abroad. Geraldson barely glanced at it. He pressed on into the dripping brush. "I'll show you where he held me up," he muttered. "This is the graveyard." The place revealed itself in fragments. Crooked headboards, rotting fences, leaning stones. Some graves were marked only by a mound of gravel breaking through the fallen leaves. Others had nothing left but a hollow in the earth, more enduring than the grief of those who once mourned there. Trees had grown up through the plots, their roots tearing aside fences, their branches casting shadows over the forgotten dead. The whole place breathed abandonment, a village of silence and decay. Suddenly, Geraldson froze. He raised his shotgun to his chest, eyes fixed ahead, and gave a low warning sound. Holker, though seeing nothing through the brush, mirrored his stance, ready for whatever might come. Then Geraldson crept forward, cautiously parting the undergrowth. Holker followed. Beneath the heavy branches of a giant spruce, they saw it. The body of a man lay sprawled on the ground. They stood over it in silence, their eyes taking in the details that strike first: the face, the posture, the clothing, those mute answers to the unspoken question that always rises when the living confront the dead. The body lay sprawled on its back, legs flung wide. One arm stretched upward, the other crooked sharply, the hand frozen near the throat. Both fists were clenched tight, as if locked in a final, desperate struggle against some unseen assailant. Beside him lay a shotgun and a game bag, the feathers of dead birds poking through its mesh. The ground around told the rest of the story. Poison oak shoots bent and stripped of bark, heaps of dead leaves shoved aside by trampling feet, and pressed into the soil beside the hips, the unmistakable marks of human knees. The truth was written on the corpse itself. The chest and hands were pale, but the face and throat were dark, purple, nearly black. The shoulders rested on a low mound, the head wrenched backward at an impossible angle, eyes bulging wide, staring into nothing. Froth clung to the open mouth, the swollen tongue protruding. The throat bore savage bruises and tears, not the marks of a single grip, but of two relentless hands that had sunk deep into the flesh and held on long past the moment of death. His clothes were soaked, his hair and mustache beaded with droplets of fog. The two men stood in silence, taking it all in at a glance. "Poor devil," Holker muttered at last. "He had a rough deal." Geraldson's eyes never left the trees. His shotgun was cocked, finger tight on the trigger. The work of a maniac, Branscombe, Pardee. Then Holker noticed something half buried in the disturbed leaves. He bent, picked it up, a red leather pocketbook. Inside were blank pages for notes. On the first leaf, a name, Halpin Frayser. On the pages that followed, scrawled in a hurried, jagged hand and written in red, were words that chilled the blood. Holker read them aloud, his voice low, while Geraldson kept his gaze fixed on the fog-draped forest, hearing menace in every drip of water from the branches above.
Holker read aloud, his voice low and uneasy. "Enthralled by some mysterious spell, I stood in the dim-lit gloom of an enchanted wood. The cypress and the myrtle twined their boughs. a brotherhood of shadows, dark with vows. The willow whispered secrets to the yew. Beneath them, nightshade, rue, and nettles grew. No bird, no bee, no breath of wholesome air, only silence, alive and watching there. The trees dripped blood, their leaves aglow with flame, and spirits whispered, calling out my name. I cried aloud, but still the spell held fast, a hopeless soul ensnared within the past. At last, the viewless... Holker stopped. The writing ended there, the final line broken, unfinished. For a moment, the two men stood in silence over the body. "That sounds like Bane," Jarelson muttered at last, lowering his gun. "Bane?" Holker asked. "Myron Bane, a poet from a century ago, wrote grim, dismal verses. I've read his collected works. That poem isn't among them, but it could have been." Holker shivered, glancing at the fog-drenched trees. "It's cold. Let's leave this place. We'll need the coroner from Napa." And with that, they turned from the graveyard, leaving behind them the body of Halpin Frayser, his fate sealed in blood, his final words swallowed by the silence of the haunted wood.
Jarelson said nothing, only shifted his stance. As he stepped past the low rise of earth where the corpse's head and shoulders rested, his boot struck something hard beneath the rotting leaves. He kicked it free. A fallen headboard. The paint was faded, the letters barely legible, but the name could still be read. Catherine LaRue. "LaRue! LaRue!" Holker exclaimed, sudden recognition in his voice. That was Brandstrom's true name, not Pardee. And, good Lord, the murdered woman's name was Frayser. Jarelson's face darkened. There's some vile mystery here, and I hate mysteries of this kind. Then it came. Out of the fog, faint at first, as though from a great distance, drifted the sound of laughter. Low, hollow, soulless. A laugh without joy, like the cry of a hyena prowling the desert night. It grew, louder, clearer, closer, rising in dreadful gradations, until it seemed to circle them, pressing against the very edge of their vision. A laugh so unnatural, so inhuman, so utterly devilish, that even these hardened manhunters felt their blood run cold. They did not raise their weapons. They did not even think of them, for this was not a menace that could be met with steel or shot. And as it had risen from silence, so it ebbed away, receding, fading, until the last hollow echoes dwindled into nothing, a joyless mechanical sound vanishing into a distance beyond measure. The fog closed in again. The graveyard was silent.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.